Would you ever throw your own newborn into a river just to escape responsibility? That's exactly what Jabari did on a cold moonlit night. He thought the current would carry away his mistake, but fate had other plans. The basket got caught in the roots of a fig tree, and Kwame, a poor farmer who couldn't even swim, jumped in to save the baby. He brought the child home to his wife, Zalika, who had just lost their own. They named him Neo, the gift. But the story didn't end there. 10 years later, Jabari returned, rich, powerful, and with a golden watch ticking on his wrist. He came to take Neo back, spreading rumors to shame Kwame's family. But during a village gathering, the truth came out. Neo held up a torn leather strap, the exact piece from Jabari's watch, ripped the night he was thrown into the river. And in front of everyone, Neo said just one thing: "I choose the man who jumped, even though he couldn't swim." What happened to the golden watch? It was sold to build a school, and hanging in the school hall, the very basket that once floated on the river. Neo now sits by the water, not haunted by ticking sounds, but by laughter and peace. The river was black glass under the swollen moon, carrying the night in its restless current. A cry tore across the silence, not from the child, but from the man. Jabari's breath steamed in the cool air as he crouched by the reeds, hands trembling around the woven basket. Inside, the infant stirred, a faint whimper, a flutter of fists. His jaw tightened. "This burden is not mine," he muttered. Words snapped like brittle twigs in the dark. Moonlight struck the gold on his wrist. For a heartbeat, the watch gleamed, an arrogant, living spark in the endless dark. And then the light folded back into shadow. Jabari's grip slackened. He lifted the basket once, twice, then hurled it outward. The sound was sharp, wicker colliding with water. But another sound followed, a tear, small yet savage, as the leather strap of the watch snagged against the basket's rim. A piece ripped free, dangling for a breathless instant, before it vanished into the black. The basket drifted, half submerged, until a gnarled fig root rose from the current like a skeletal hand, seizing it. The infant cried, a hoarse, broken wail swallowed by the rushing water. Across the river, unseen by Jabari, a figure stood rigid. Kwame's outline melted into the shadow of the trees, but his eyes did not blink. The cry carried across to him, tangled with the rush of water, tangled with something else, tick, tick, faint and uncanny, as though time itself beat inside the river. He could not move. His chest ached with each note of that cry. The basket rocked, spinning, caught in the grip of root and current. The infant's cry thinned into a rasp, no louder than a moth against glass. Kwame's throat tightened. He felt the ground shifting inside him, the unbearable knowledge that he alone bore witness. Yet his feet were stone. The wind lifted, carrying the sour smell of river mud, the bitter sweetness of night blossoms. Leaves whispered overhead like warning voices. The moon, high and merciless, poured its silver over the water, and the basket gleamed pale against the dark. Still, Kwame could not move. The cries faltered, then paused. Silence settled heavy, punctuated by the inexorable pulse, tick, tick, faint, swallowed by water but undeniable. Kwame shuddered. His palms dampened with sweat. He pressed them against his thighs, hard, to force sensation back into his body. Then the basket shifted again, tilted dangerously. Water splashed over its rim. The baby coughed, a sound like drowning. That was when Kwame's paralysis broke. He did not cry out. He did not curse the man across the river. He simply felt the weight of a rope in his hand, coarse and rough, and the decision clamped around him like iron. Behind him, 2 villagers, faces pale in the moonlight, looked on in disbelief. They saw what he meant to do. They saw the rope. "Kwame, you can't," one whispered. But he was already knotting it tight around his waist, tugging hard, breath shallow. The twist of fate lay in the rope itself. It had been used earlier that day to drag timber, now stained and frayed. He had cursed its weakness when it burned his palms. Now it was all he had. He thrust the loose end into the villager's hands, his voice cracking low. "Hold fast." The cries rose again from the river, brittle but alive. Kwame closed his eyes. He could not swim. He had never dared. But that knowledge meant nothing now. The water exploded around him as he leapt. Cold slammed into his chest, burning, pulling. He sank, arms flailing. The rope wrenched tight at his waist. He gasped. Swallowed river? The current roared in his ears, loud as drums. Somewhere above, the villagers shouted, the rope straining in their grip. Then, impact. His hand struck wicker. Splinters bit into his skin. The basket jolted, bobbing. He clutched it to his chest, lungs screaming for air. His arm tore against a submerged branch. Pain flared sharp, hot. Blood and river mingled. The rope slipped, jerked, then tightened again. Inside the basket, the child stirred, fists clenching. Something small and stubborn pressed into Kwame's palm. He opened his hand and felt it. The strip of torn leather, clutched as though the child itself had chosen to carry it. The river surged, tried to steal them both, but he clung tighter. Above, the rope pulled. The villagers hauled, muscles straining. Kwame's body scraped against stone, water battering, but the basket was safe against his chest. Then air, sudden, staggering. They dragged him onto the mud, his lungs convulsing as he coughed out the river. The infant's chest rose weakly, then fell. For a terrifying instant, stillness. Kwame pressed trembling hands against the tiny ribs, gentle but insistent. His body knew what to do, though his mind spun. One push, another, then sound, a cry, piercing, furious, alive. The night split open. Kwame's whole frame shook. He pressed his forehead against the damp edge of the basket, tears blurring moonlight into shards. His lips brushed the child's brow. "From this moment," he whispered, voice raw, "you are mine." The rope fell limp beside him, mud-streaked, a reminder of risk. His arm throbbed from the gash, but he cradled the infant closer, warmth and life fragile against him. In the distance, a lantern flickered. Zalika's house, waiting, the glow small and uncertain. He rose, legs weak but driven, carrying the child into the night. The river behind them kept its secrets. The torn leather strip, wet against the baby's hand, clung stubbornly, proof that the past was not drowned. The moon watched, unblinking, as though time itself had borne witness. Kwame stepped forward, each pace heavy with fear and promise. The cries of the child merged with the rhythm of his heart, both fragile, both stubborn. The lantern's glow drew nearer, pulsing like hope. Yet as he crossed the last stretch of darkness, the night whispered back at him. The river did not forget. The sound lingered in his ears, tick, tick, faint, but relentless, reminding him that what he carried was not only life, but truth. The basket rocked slightly in his arms as though the river still clutched at it, unwilling to let go. He tightened his hold, gaze fixed on the waiting light, unaware that behind him, On the far bank, a figure watched in silence, unseen, the gold at his wrist glinting once, before the darkness swallowed it whole. And so the night held its breath, the child cried, and a man walked into fate with nothing but rope-burned skin, torn flesh, and the fragile weight of a life that was never meant to be his, yet was, irrevocably. From this moment on, the rope cut into his waist as though it meant to slice him in two. Kwame's body swung once above the black current, the villagers' hands gripping the other end, their knuckles pale under the moonlight. The cries from the basket stabbed through the night again, weak and jagged like a bird with broken wings. The river did not calm, it roared, impatient, filled with teeth. Kwame's breath shuddered. He had never swum a single stroke in his life. Yet now, with death below and helpless life before him, he clenched his jaw and jumped. The plunge tore the breath from his chest. Water slammed him cold, searing like knives of ice. For a heartbeat, he forgot which way was up. The rope yanked against his ribs, dragging him sideways. His arms thrashed, fingers clawing at nothing but current. Above, the villagers shouted, their voices scattering like startled birds. Kwame fought the instinct to give in. He forced his body forward, eyes stinging, lungs raging. The basket was out there. He could feel it as surely as the burn in his blood. Then something moved in the darkness, a ripple larger than the others, a shape that broke the water skin with reptilian silence. A crocodile's snout glinted, distant but real. Its presence was not near enough to strike, but near enough to remind him that time was merciless. The cries from the basket cracked again, a cough, a sputter. He knew he would not reach the child if he allowed fear to turn his limbs to stone. He clawed forward, each pull heavy as if the river itself wished to claim him. Branches floated by, stripped of bark, some catching against him. One whipped across his forearm with a sting, leaving a bleeding scratch. The salt of blood mingled with the taste of mud in his mouth. He coughed, gagged, then forced another lunge. The rope strained. The villagers dug their heels into the soil, shouting his name, pulling and letting go in rhythm, trying to match his struggle against the current. Kwame had tied the knot himself, double-looped, but still it cut deeper with each jerk, carving pain across his waist. He ignored it, his eyes locked on the basket now spinning half-submerged, its rim catching light, its fragile weight rocking against the roots of the fig tree. At last his fingers found the wicker. The splinters tore into his palms, but he did not let go. He pressed the basket hard against his chest, teeth gritted, legs kicking clumsily against the current. For one heartbeat, he thought it was empty. But then a fist, tiny and desperate, brushed his skin. The child's hand had latched onto something. He pried it open and felt the strip of wet leather clinging there, ripped from another man's watch. For a moment, the current stopped existing. The world narrowed to the fragment in his palm, proof of cruelty, proof of fate. Then the river roared again. His lungs screamed for air. He kicked upward, basket in one arm, rope searing his side. Above, the villagers leaned back, pulling. The rope groaned, fibers threatening to snap. He could feel it slipping inch by inch. He shouted without sound, forcing his grip tighter, and the villagers pulled once more with a desperate heave. The bank rose suddenly, mud, stones, the smell of wet earth. Kwame's knees hit first, sending pain up his legs. He tumbled, still clutching the basket, his chest convulsed, coughing water, choking until air clawed back in. The infant lay pale, lips parted. A silence worse than any roar filled Kwame's ears. He set the basket down on the grass, hands shaking, then pressed his palms gently against the child's tiny chest. 1, 2, 3. He had no training, only instinct and terror. He pressed again, whispered through clenched teeth, though the words were barely sound. Then, as if the night itself demanded it, the child coughed. A gush of water sprayed from his lips. A cry followed, piercing, raw, fierce. The cry spread across the bank like fire catching dry grass. It was life refusing to yield. Kwame's vision blurred. His shoulders sagged. He lifted the child into his arms, holding him tight, pressing him close until he could feel the hammering of that fragile heart. He rocked slightly, unaware that tears had wet his face. "You are blood of my blood," he breathed, words torn from somewhere deeper than thought. "From this night, you belong to me." The villagers behind him said nothing. They only stared, their faces pale, their eyes unsettled by what they had witnessed. One of them touched the rope, the mud still clinging to it, and muttered a prayer. Another knelt, reached to steady Kwame, but withdrew when he saw the man's trembling strength, the way he refused to let the child go. The crocodile's shadow drifted away downstream, unseen now, but the knowledge lingered that death had circled close. Kwame's arm throbbed where the branch had cut him. Blood mingled with river silt. It was the cost. He accepted it. The strip of leather clung damp against the child's hand. Kwame tried to loosen the grip, but the tiny fist closed tighter, as though the infant claimed it, as though it was more than a scrap, as though it was a tether between past and present. Kwame shivered. He did not yet understand, but he felt the weight of that detail. He rose at last, legs shaking but steadying beneath him. The lantern's glow in the distance burned faint, like a star low on the horizon. Zalika's house, home, or something like it. He shifted the child in his arms, wrapping the basket's wet cloths around him. The child's cry softened, a hiccup, a weary sigh. The villagers still said nothing. They only watched as Kwame turned, basket slung in one arm, the child in the other. He did not ask them to follow. He only walked, each step carrying the echo of water, the throb of his wound, the relentless whisper of what he had just defied. The night thickened with fog from the river. It clung to his skin, cool and damp. Every sound seemed louder, the rasp of crickets, the groan of trees in the wind, the beat of his own pulse. But within that swell of sound was the fragile cry that had nearly been extinguished. It rose and fell, fragile yet persistent, the sound of life remade. He crossed the path that curved toward the village, the soil soft underfoot, the smell of rain clinging to the grass. Shadows stretched long, and for a moment he thought he saw movement ahead. He tightened his hold on the child, heart leaping, but it was only the sway of branches, the leather strip, cold and slick, still pressed against his palm. He realized it was not just a fragment. It was evidence, though he did not yet know against whom. It was a secret already demanding to be kept. He looked down at the child who stirred, clutch still firm. His heart clenched. He would not pry it away. Not tonight. As the lantern glow grew nearer, the cries softened further, drifting into a breathless calm. Kwame's own breath came harsh, but steadier. He whispered once more, though no one heard but the child. "I chose you, and now you choose me." Behind him the river continued, carrying the memory of what had nearly been lost. The rope lay discarded on the bank, frayed, marked by his blood. It would remain there, a silent witness to risk. But ahead, the night opened. Zalika's light flickered, waiting. The house that had known sorrow would soon hold something more. Kwame stepped toward it, burdened, yet reborn, carrying both the child and the proof of shadows yet to come. The infant whimpered once, then nestled against him. Kwame's chest tightened, not with fear but with the weight of what he had claimed. His heart, raw and unguarded, bent toward hope even as the world whispered otherwise. And so he walked into the night, soaked, scarred, but carrying a cry that would not die. Behind him the river swallowed its secrets. Before him the lantern glowed like fragile salvation. The rope burned his waist. The leather strip clung to the infant's hand, and his wound pulsed with fire. Yet none of these were heavier than the truth he had spoken, a truth that bound him more surely than any rope. In the dark, with the child's breath against his skin, Kwame stepped into a life he had not chosen, but would never surrender. The lantern flickered once more, and then the night closed around them, leaving only the sound of footsteps, fading toward a door that would soon open, and a silence that was not peace, but promise. The cradle was still. The faint smell of milk clung to the fabric, though the child who had once lain there would never breathe again. Zalika sat hunched beside it, her hands resting on her lap, fingers interlaced so tightly the knuckles were white. The candle at her side flickered low, wax pooling like tears on the rough table. She did not blink. She did not move. Only the silence pressed down. Silence made heavier by the ghost of lullabies unsung. A knock never came. Instead, the door creaked open, pushed by the night wind. Kwame filled the frame, his face streaked with mud, his shirt torn at the chest, and in his arms a dripping bundle. The cries from within the cloth shattered the stillness. Zalika's head snapped up. For one disbelieving second she thought it was her child returned, resurrected. But the cry was different, hoarser, threaded with a stranger's fear. Kwame stepped in, shoulders trembling. "The river tried to take him," he said, voice raw, "but I would not let it." He set the basket down carefully, as though it contained flame, and parted the wet wrappings. A small face shone in the dim candlelight, cheeks blotched red from cold, lips trembling with life. Zalika's breath caught. Her arms ached to reach, yet she gripped the cradle tighter, as though betraying the memory of her lost child would be another death. But the infant's cry cut through hesitation. She leaned forward, her hands trembling, and gathered him against her chest. The warmth startled her. The rhythm of the tiny heartbeat drummed into her skin. The wet cloth shifted, and something fell onto her lap, a strip of leather darkened by river water, torn unevenly at one end. Zalika lifted it with 2 fingers, sniffed, then frowned. The smell was sharp, treated, expensive, the kind of leather only men with money and pride wore in the market square. Her mind stirred. She had sold hides in her youth, bargaining with traders. She knew quality. This fragment had been cut from something costly. She looked at Kwame sharply. He shook his head. "It was in his hand when I pulled him out." The child stirred, whimpering, and Zalika pressed him closer. The leather dangled in her other hand, whispering questions she dared not speak. She tucked it aside, sliding it into the hollow of a dried gourd hanging near the roof, where trinkets and keepsakes were hidden from daily eyes. For now, the truth could wait. Kwame watched, his chest still heaving from exertion. "We cannot give him back to the river," he murmured. His eyes, bloodshot and wet, pleaded for her agreement. If fate sent him, then fate chose us. The candle flame bent in the draft. Zalika's shadow trembled on the wall as she lowered the baby toward her chest. She smelled his skin, raw and salty with river water, but beneath it was the scent of milk yet to come. Her arms closed around him. Something in her heart, torn ragged by grief, stitched itself with sudden fierce threads. They lit more candles, crowding the table with trembling flames. The room glowed warm, though the night outside was cold. Kwame fetched a clay bowl and filled it with river water carried earlier that day. Zalika dipped her fingers in and let the drops fall on the child's brow. The water ran down like silver threads, catching candlelight, and the baby blinked against the cool touch. They whispered together, their voices not raised but solemn, the kind of tone that bends time. "You are Neo," Kwame said first. "Gift." The word rang soft yet firm. Zalika echoed it, her lips brushing the baby's forehead. Neo. From a wooden chest she pulled a bracelet of beads, carved from pale wood years ago, meant for a child who had never lived long enough to wear it. Her fingers hesitated, then she slid it over Neo's wrist. The beads knocked softly together, a sound like rain against bamboo. The child's fist tightened, as though recognizing the weight of belonging. The room filled with the smell of beeswax and river water, the hiss of wick, the faint squeak of wicker as the old cradle rocked when Zalika leaned. The silence grew heavy again, but now it was a silence that cradled instead of crushed. Later, when the baby slept between them, Kwame reached up and tapped the gourd hanging from the roof. The leather strip inside rattled faintly. "One day he must know," he said. His voice was steady now, though his eyes still glimmered. Zalika nodded, her jaw tight. But not now, not when he breathed so new. They sat in the dim, watching the child's chest rise and fall. Each breath was fragile, each breath a victory. Kwame's arm, scratched raw from the branch, throbbed, but he said nothing. Zalika's eyes lingered on Neo's face, tracing it with the reverence of one who knew what it was to lose. The candlelight burned low, shadows lengthened, and then, faint at first but certain, the sound returned. Tick, tick. Neither candle nor cradle made the noise. It seemed to rise from the walls, from the gourd above, from the very air. Zalika stiffened, clutching the baby closer. Kwame's head lifted, his eyes darting to the ceiling where the strip of leather lay hidden. The sound was gone as soon as it came, swallowed by night, but its echo pressed into the silence. Zalika bent over Neo, rocking gently. Her lips brushed his ear, whispering words meant for no one else. "You fell into my heart," she said, her voice breaking. The baby stirred, sighing in sleep, unaware that his life had already tangled with secrets older than him. Kwame leaned against the wall, exhausted, the rope burn at his waist stinging. His eyes closed, but his mind refused rest. The river's roar still filled his skull. He heard again the cry that had nearly vanished. He saw again the crocodile's shadow, and through it all, the echo of that tick, relentless as fate. The night pressed closer. Outside, the river moved as it always had, carrying reeds, branches, whispers of men's sins. Inside, the house breathed with candle smoke and infant sighs. Two souls bound by grief and love had taken into their arms a life they had not expected, but would now protect against everything, against river, against time, against truth itself. The baby's fist lifted once, beads glinting in the faint light. The gourd swayed slightly above, as if stirred by breath. the strip of leather whispering inside it. Kwame opened his eyes and met Zalika's gaze. In their silence was a vow, heavier than any word spoken aloud, and far above, beyond the roof, the moon stared down cold and patient, knowing secrets the night had only begun to tell. Neo woke with a gasp that drowned the night. Sweat soaked his chest, his thin blanket twisted tight around his legs. He clutched the wooden beads circling his wrist as though they might anchor him against the pull of the dream. The house was still. Shadows wavered on the clay walls, a single oil lamp sputtering low. His breath tore in and out, the sound too loud in the silence. He shut his eyes, but the dream clung stubbornly, the gleam of something metallic beneath dark water, a hand too small to keep hold, and that strange pulse again. Tick, tick. Not the drum of his people, not the wind through branches, but a sound too measured, too alien. He rolled onto his side, listening hard. Only the night insects, the faint stir of his mother's breathing in the other room. The beads dug into his wrist, smooth yet firm, reminding him he belonged here. He whispered the name they had given him, though his lips barely moved. Neo. Saying it was like throwing a rope into darkness. His heart slowed, though unease lingered. Morning came as it always did, light spilling over the thatched roof, the smell of maize porridge rising from the hearth. Neo ran outside before eating, his bare feet striking the dust. He was 10 now, wiry and restless. The village buzzed around him, goats bleating, women bargaining, the air thick with wood smoke and laughter. He carried a reed flute tucked into his belt and a half-finished basket in his hands. Kwame had been teaching him the weave, showing how each strand must bend without breaking. Neo struggled with patience, his fingers often fumbling, but today he wanted to surprise his father by finishing it alone. He crouched under the shade of a tree, the sun warm on his back, the smell of dry grass sharp in his nose. His fingers moved faster, the reeds bending, but even as he wove, the sound from his dream clung to him. Tick, tick. His hands began to follow it, the rhythm slipping into the weave until the basket's pattern faltered. He scowled, tearing out the last row in frustration. Zalika called from the doorway, "Neo, eat before the food grows cold." He glanced up, guilt softening his face. She smiled faintly, though her eyes lingered longer than usual, watching him clutch the beads on his wrist. Later that week, the village erupted in sound. The annual drum festival painted the air with thunder. Skin stretched tight over carved wood boomed, the rhythms colliding, hands striking so fast the air itself seemed to vibrate. Neo joined the circle of children, his reed flute forgotten at his side. His palms itched to clap, his feet itched to stamp, but when he lifted his hands he found another rhythm pouring out of him. Not the soaring, rolling cadence of the festival, a slower, steadier beat, tick, tick. His palms smacked against each other in that strange pattern, cutting across the flow. Heads turned. The children frowned. The drummers faltered for a breath. Zalika, from across the crowd, froze as though the earth had shifted under her. Kwame's eyes shot toward the gourd hanging at home, where a strip of leather slept in secret. The sound of his son's hand struck too close. Neo flushed, embarrassed by the stares, and dropped his arms. The drum surged back, swallowing his mistake, yet the strangeness lingered, hovering like smoke. He retreated to the edge of the gathering, staring down at his wrists, at the beads that marked him as theirs. He tapped them unconsciously. Tick, tick, tick. That night, the dream returned. He saw roots tangling under water, a cradle swaying, and once again the glint of something golden that pulsed with time. He tried to reach, but his hand was a child's, too small, too weak. When he jolted awake, his chest heaving, the sound seemed to linger longer. Tick, tick. He pressed his fist to his mouth, willing it away. Days passed. He worked with Kwame, carrying baskets of grain, running errands to the riverbank. The sun pressed heat into his skin. The dust clung to his ankles, yet the unease did not lift. One afternoon, while gathering figs near the river, he found himself standing at the water's edge. The tree loomed, its roots thick and ancient, half submerged. He stared at them, his throat tightening. Something inside him whispered questions. His feet shifted closer, toes digging into damp soil. He crouched, peering at the current sliding around the roots. For a moment, he thought he saw an outline, something shaped like a basket rocking just beneath the surface. He blinked. It was gone. Kwame's voice called from further up the path, breaking the spell. "Neo, bring what you've gathered. We must be home before dark." Neo straightened quickly, clutching the figs, but his eyes lingered on the water. That night, lying awake, he asked the question aloud. "Where did I come from?" His voice cracked, barely a whisper. Kwame, lying nearby, shifted. Silence stretched long. Then, soft but firm, Kwame answered, "From where love chose you." It was the truth he could give, but not the whole truth. Zalika stirred in the shadows. Neo waited for more, but none came. The silence pressed back. He turned to the wall, beads tight against his wrist, unsatisfied. The following morning, the village prepared for market day. Dust swirled as carts rolled in, voices shouting prices, the smell of roasted groundnuts thick in the air. Neo wandered through the crowd, trying to lose the weight of his thoughts. Yet even here, among the noise, he tapped his palm against his thigh. Tick, tick, tick. His body betrayed him. He quickened his pace, ashamed, weaving through strangers' legs until the market blurred into color and sound. It was then he felt eyes on him. He turned, but no one stood out among the crowd. Still, his skin prickled. He pulled his beads tighter against his wrist, the gesture both shield and anchor. That night, while Zalika prepared stew and Kwame mended fishing nets, Neo sat in the corner, silent. The gourd above swayed faintly, stirred by wind. Inside, the strip of leather shifted with a papery whisper. The sound sent a chill through the room, though neither parent spoke of it. Neo's head lifted. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Zalika forced a smile. "Only the wind, child." But her hands trembled as she stirred the pot. As the days stretched into weeks, the unease deepened. Neo could not escape the rhythm. He drummed it on the ground with sticks, unaware, until other children teased him. He tapped it against his knees while carrying water. The more he tried to resist, the stronger it seemed to grow, as though something unseen called through the very air. One evening, as the sun bled red over the horizon, Neo returned to the fig tree by the river. He sat beneath it, the roots twisting like veins into water. His lips parted. "Am I from here?" he whispered. His voice broke against the wind. The river gave no answer, only the steady beat of water against roots. Almost like ticking, he clenched his fists, nails biting his palms. "Who am I?" The cry cracked out louder, swallowed by the current. Behind him, footsteps approached. He turned quickly, but it was only children chasing one another, their laughter spilling like bells. They did not notice him. He pressed his forehead against the bark, eyes burning. His breath came ragged. The silence inside him grew unbearable. He turned away at last, wiping his face with the back of his hand. As he started down the dusty path, he noticed a rising plume of dirt in the distance. A group of riders was approaching, their outlines dark against the reddening sky. The dust swirled thick, shrouding their features, but the glint of metal caught the fading sun. Neo froze, his stomach tightening. Something in that shimmer answered the rhythm that haunted his dreams. The sound came unbidden, louder now in his mind than ever before. Tick, tick. The world seemed to hush around him. The riders drew closer, their forms sharpening through the dust. Neo's hand tightened around his beads. His breath hitched. He did not know why, but he felt the ground beneath him tilt, as though everything he had ever known was about to crack. He stepped back slowly, the fig tree at his back, the river murmuring below. The riders advanced, their dust cloud curling high into the dying light. Neo swallowed hard, heart hammering with fear and anticipation. He whispered again, to no one but himself, "Who am I?" The question hung unanswered as the dust cloud swallowed the horizon, and the rhythm in his chest beat faster, relentless, as though time itself had finally turned to face him. The white horse appeared first through the haze of dust, its hooves striking the earth like drums of war. Children scattered, women shielded their baskets, and the air filled with shouts and startled laughter. The rider sat high, back straight, robes pale against the animal's mane. Gold gleamed on his wrist each time he lifted a hand to wave, the flash slicing sunlight into the eyes of all who watched. Behind him rolled a wagon draped in cloth, its heavy wheels grinding stone, followed by men carrying crates that clattered like bones. The stranger did not feel like a stranger at all. He moved as though he had returned to something that belonged to him. Neo froze at the edge of the square, his breath caught between ribs. His eyes locked not on the white horse, nor the gold glinting in the sun, but on the face that commanded them both. He did not know the man, yet some ancient recognition twisted inside him. The beat in his ears quickened. Tick, tick. The sound threaded through the chaos of the crowd until he could hear nothing else. Jabari smiled as he reined the horse to a halt. His voice rolled over the people like oil poured on water. "Brothers, sisters," he called, his tone rich, practiced. "I bring gifts. Timber for a school, books for your children, cloth for your homes." He gestured to the wagon behind him, and men flung open its doors. Bolts of fabric spilled bright, tin rattled, coin clinked. Murmurs swept the crowd, awe and hunger tangled together. Neo's throat burned. The man's hand rose again, waving, and the watch on his wrist caught the light. Gold, heavy, alive. The same gleam that haunted his sleep. The tick inside Neo's head grew louder, syncing with the motion of that hand, with the glint of that metal. His stomach clenched. Kwame stood a few paces behind Neo, his body stiff as a bow drawn tight. He did not move closer. His hands were knotted at his sides, his eyes narrowed. Zalika, watching from their doorway, gripped the lintel until her knuckles turned pale. The elders welcomed Jabari with cautious smiles, but he was already stepping down from the horse, brushing dust from his robe as though the ground itself were beneath him. He carried no weapon, only papers bound in cloth. He bowed before the chief, his words smooth, almost humble. "I come not only with gifts, but with duty. A child once lost must be returned to his rightful bloodline. I bring proof, though I need not speak it here." The chief frowned, puzzled. A ripple passed through the people. Neo stiffened. His hands dug into the beads on his wrist. He wanted to step back, but his feet anchored. He felt the weight of unseen eyes on him, heavier than the crowd's. Jabari's gaze slid over the people until it landed on Neo. For an instant it stayed there, sharp, unblinking. Neo's chest seized, his eyes burned. The man smiled, faint and cruel, as though recognition had already been agreed upon. Neo dropped his gaze, but the sound of ticking filled his ears. Impossible to shut out. At the market later that day, whispers spread like fire. A boy found in the river. Parents who had claimed him. A man of wealth who had returned. No one spoke names at first, only riddles disguised as gossip. But by dusk every tongue was loosened, and Neo's world shifted with each passing rumor. He walked through the crowd numb, every voice slicing at him. The child belonged to another. A river gift returned. Not truly theirs. He stumbled, clutching figs too tightly until their flesh burst sweet and sticky in his hands. At the far end of the square, Jabari stood with merchants, pouring wine, his laughter smooth as honey. He pressed coins into palms, whispering into ears. Each man who left his circle left heavier with drink and lighter with loyalty. The gold at his wrist glimmered even in the firelight. Impossible for Neo not to notice. Neo backed into a wall, his chest rising too fast. The beads on his wrist cut into skin. He lifted his hands to cover his ears, but the ticking only grew louder. He pressed harder until his temples throbbed. When he looked again, Jabari's gaze was waiting. The man raised his cup in a silent toast, his smile wider now. At home, Zalika dropped to her knees by the fire, grinding herbs though her mind was elsewhere. Kwame paced, his steps uneven. "He means to take what is ours," Kwame muttered, voice harsh. "He comes dressed in gifts, but holds a knife beneath the cloth." Zalika pressed her palm flat against the floor, as though steadying the earth itself. "We cannot speak yet," she whispered. "Not until we must." Neo must not hear, but Neo already had. He sat outside their door, knees to his chest, breath ragged. He stared into the dust, replaying the day until every detail carved into his skull. The white horse, the wagon of gifts, the papers, the glint of gold, the ticking in his head that no drum, no laughter, no voice could silence. He thought of the tree by the river, of the dream that returned each night, the image of roots holding a basket, the hand too small to grasp, the flash of something golden sinking below. His stomach twisted. He pressed his hands to his ears again, whispering to himself, "No, no." But the ticking only grew louder. The dust from the riders had long settled, yet Neo felt as though the earth itself trembled still. He lifted his head, eyes wide. He could almost hear the river calling, almost feel the pull of its current, almost see again the moment of drowning. Only this time he was not pulled up. This time no rope was tied to his waist. The fire inside the house popped. Zalika murmured a prayer. Kwame stopped pacing, his shadow falling long across the doorway. Neo stared into the night, his chest hollow, and then, from the square, the sound carried faint but clear, the striking of a watch being wound. A sharp click, followed by steady ticking that seemed to echo through the bones of the village. Neo's heart clenched, his throat closed. The sound was not in his dream this time. It was real, alive, only a few streets away. He pressed his forehead against his knees, whispering through clenched teeth, "Why does it sound like me?" Above him the stars burned cold and far. In the distance, Jabari's laughter rolled smooth through the night, carrying with it the weight of promises and the shadow of claims yet to come. Neo lifted his head slowly, eyes wet, his body trembling. He did not notice Zalika standing silently behind the doorway, her face rigid, nor Kwame's hands curling into fists. He only heard the watch, tick, tick. The sound matched his pulse until it felt as though his very blood belonged not to him, but to the stranger who had ridden in shining and smiling. The night ended with silence thick as ash, but the question left behind was louder than drums. If the man with the golden watch had come to claim him, what part of Neo was already his? The drums did not sound for joy that morning. They boomed across the village square with the urgency of thunder rolling before a storm. Every family was summoned. Men left their fields, women abandoned their pots, children clutched each other's hands as they streamed toward the great baobab tree. Its roots gripped the earth like ancient fists, its branches spreading wide above the gathering crowd. The air was heavy, thick with dust, kicked by running feet and the smell of sweat and smoke. The drums pounded, demanding attention, demanding judgment. Neo stood at the edge of the throng, his chest tight. He had never heard the drums strike like this. They did not celebrate, they accused. He glanced at Kwame and Zalika, who stood close but silent, their faces pale and taut. The murmur of the people rose and fell like restless waves, and above it all the baobab's shadow spread like a warning. The chief stepped forward, his robe stiff with age, his staff planted deep in the soil. His voice carried across the clearing. We meet today to weigh truth. A claim has been brought concerning the boy Neo. We will hear it under the eyes of our ancestors. At the edge of the circle, Jabari moved forward. His robes gleamed, his smile polite, but his eyes cut sharp. In his hand he carried a bundle of papers tied with cord. The gold at his wrist winked with every gesture, its steady gleam hypnotic. He bowed low to the chief, then turned to the people, his voice smooth. I come with proof. Blood must return to blood. A child once lost has been hidden. I bring papers of lineage, records that show his place in my house. What was taken must be restored. Gasps rippled. The crowd shifted, necks craning, whispers hissing like snakes in dry grass. Kwame's fists clenched, veins standing out on his arms. Zalika swayed faintly, her lips pressed white. Neo's ears rang. Papers? Lineage? The ticking in his head surged louder, drowning even the drums. One of the wine sellers from the market stepped forward suddenly, cheeks flushed, his tongue loosened by too much drink the night before. It was Jabari's men spreading the tale, he blurted. They whispered it to us, poured us drink, set the fire with their words. The crowd turned sharply. Murmurs grew sharper, suspicion cutting new edges into the air. Jabari's smile did not falter, but a flash of irritation crossed his eyes before he smoothed it away. Men hear what they want to hear, he said, voice honeyed. But truth does not need wine to stand. The chief studied him long, then motioned for silence. He looked toward Kwame. You who raised the boy, what say you? Kwame's chest heaved. His voice cracked like dry wood. I say I found him in the river when the night was black, when no one else would dive. I say he lives because my hands pulled him free. I say he is mine not by paper but by breath. The people stirred again. Some nodded, others frowned. A woman clutched her shawl tighter, her eyes darting between Jabari's gold and Kwame's trembling hands. Neo stood frozen, the world blurring. He caught fragments of words: river child, stolen, bloodline, but they pierced too deep. His breath shortened, and then, like a knife, one phrase cut clear. The boy from the river was never theirs. It was as though the earth itself cracked beneath him. Every dream, every nightmare, every tick of unseen time converged in that sentence. His chest caved, his knees buckled. He stumbled backward, clutching his beads, his voice breaking loose, raw. "So I was never meant to live?" His cry tore across the clearing. Silence fell heavy. Faces turned, eyes widened. Kwame stepped toward him, but Neo was already running, his feet tearing the dust, his heart burning. The baobab loomed behind, the crowd fading to a hum. He ran toward the river, toward the roots of the fig tree that had haunted his dreams. The sun above blurred into a smear of white. His lungs heaved. He reached the bank and collapsed to his knees, staring into the water swirling dark and endless. The river hissed back at him, cold and merciless. He gripped the roots, his nails breaking, his voice shaking. "Do I even deserve to be here?" His cry echoed against the current, swallowed, returned. He bent forward, his reflection a blur of water and tears. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw another face there, the stranger's, with gold flashing at the wrist. He jerked back, shuddering. Behind him, footsteps pounded. Kwame burst through the brush, his face contorted with grief, Zalika stumbling after him. She reached for Neo, but her knees buckled. With a faint cry, she crumpled onto the earth. Kwame caught her, cradling her limp body, his own tears breaking free. He lifted his head, his gaze blazing with fury and sorrow, locked on the direction of the village, where Jabari still stood cloaked in smiles. The wind rose then, violent, rushing through the trees. Dust whipped. The roots of the fig groaned, shifting against the water's pull. Neo pressed his hands to his ears, but the ticking hammered louder, louder, until it seemed the river itself beat with that sound. Tick, tick. His breath strangled. His body shook. The world around him darkened as though the sky itself had swallowed the sun. And then silence, thick, absolute. Only Neo's trembling breath remained. He lifted his eyes, wide and wet, to the shadowed river, to the trembling roots, to his father's desperate hold on his mother. His chest rose and fell in ragged gasps, the beads on his wrist rattling faintly. He did not know who he was anymore. He only knew the ground beneath his feet was crumbling, and the truth that waited ahead would tear everything apart. The path narrowed into dust and thorn, the evening sun bleeding low behind the hills. Neo's breath tore in his chest as he stumbled down the slope. His face was raw from tears, his shirt clinging damp with sweat. He thought he had escaped, that the weight of the village's whispers might loosen if he hid in the fading light. But at the bend, a figure blocked the way. Jabari stood waiting, his robe unwrinkled as though the dust dared not touch him. The white horse grazed nearby, the reins loose, but Jabari's eyes were fixed only on the boy. He raised his wrist slowly, letting the gold catch the dying sun. The ticking, steady and merciless, pulsed louder than Neo's own heart. "You have wandered enough," Jabari said softly. His voice carried the authority of someone long accustomed to obedience. "Come with me, and everything you have hungered for will be placed in your hands." Neo froze. The words seemed to press on him from all sides. Behind them lay promises he had never heard spoken aloud. Belonging, wealth, a name that carried weight. But the glint of the watch struck sharper than the promises. He had seen it in dreams, in nightmares, gleaming beneath dark water. His fists trembled. Jabari stepped closer, the scent of fine leather and spice trailing him. "You are mine," he said, his voice low. "Not theirs, not the ones who clung to you from pity. You are blood of my blood. Let me make you whole." Neo's stomach turned. His fingers dug into the beads on his wrist. He thought of Zalika collapsed on the earth, Kwame's face drawn in grief, the drums of judgment pounding through the village. He wanted to scream, but his voice lodged deep. Instead, he reached slowly into his pocket. His fingers brushed what he had taken before fleeing, the strip of leather, stiff with age, torn at one end. He pulled it free and held it up, his hand trembling. The air seemed to still. Even the horse lifted its head, ears twitching. "This," Neo whispered, his voice cracking, "was in my hand the night you threw me to the river." The words landed like stones in still water. Jabari's composure faltered for the first time. His eyes darted to the leather, then to the watch at his wrist. Neo's small fingers pushed the strip against the strap. The ragged tear aligned perfectly, a wound that had waited years for completion. Gasps rose from villagers who had followed at a distance, their whispers choking into silence. Jabari tried to speak, but Neo cut him off. His voice was louder now, fueled by a fire he had never felt before. "You say I am yours because of blood, but blood did not pull me from the river. Blood did not give me breath again. It was him." Neo's voice cracked, but he forced the words. "It was the man who tied a rope around his waist, though he could not swim. It was the woman who pressed me to her chest, though her arms were still empty with grief." The strip of leather fell from Neo's hand and landed in the dust between them. The ticking of the watch seemed suddenly too loud, vulgar in the silence. Jabari looked down, his shoulders bent under a weight no wealth could carry. The gold at his wrist no longer shone warm. It glared cold, like the eye of a corpse. The chief stepped forward slowly, his face lined, his eyes grave. He took in the evidence, the strip of leather, the trembling boy who stood unbroken, the man whose mask had cracked. He turned to Kwame and Zalika, who had reached the slope, their faces drawn, their eyes fixed only on the child. The chief lowered his head to them. It was not just respect, it was acknowledgement. The weight of the village shifted in that gesture. Jabari opened his mouth, but no words came. His hand twitched at the watch, as though to hide it, as though to wrench it free. But his fingers froze. He let it drop back against his wrist, its ticking now an accusation instead of power. His head bowed, Neo's chest heaved. His strength, summoned like a storm, drained at once. His knees weakened. Kwame rushed forward and caught him, arms wrapping him tight. Zalika's tears fell unchecked, her hands trembling as they stroked his hair. Neo sagged against them, clinging as though he had nearly been lost again to the river. The leather strip lay between them all, mute and damning. The villagers stared, their mouths shut, the weight of truth pressing heavier than any judgment. And then, silence so deep it rang. The watch at Jabari's wrist slipped loose. The strap tore fully, as if finishing what the river had begun. The gold timepiece crashed against the stones, its sound sharp, final. Its ticking faltered, then died. Neo lifted his face, streaked with tears, and saw it lying there. He did not reach for it. He pressed his face back into Kwame's chest, his small hands gripping hard. The sun dipped behind the ridge. Darkness crawled across the slope. The people stood motionless, held in the gravity of what they had witnessed. In the gathering gloom, The broken watch glinted once more before the shadows swallowed it whole, and in that silence, with Neo safe in his parents' arms, the world waited, breathless, for what would come next. The hammer struck, and the hall fell silent. The gold watch lay on a velvet cloth, its face cracked but still gleaming. A trader from a far-off town raised his hand higher, his voice firm. The final bid rang out, echoing through the chamber like a bell at a burial. The crowd exhaled, sold. The weight of years, of deceit, of silence, was lifted into another man's keeping. The villagers watched as the merchant tucked the watch away, the gleam swallowed into a wooden case. It no longer belonged to Jabari, nor to time itself. The coins clattered into a clay jar, heavy, undeniable. Kwame stood stiff, his hand gripping Zalika's, while Neo hovered close, his fingers twisting the beads around his wrist. The people murmured. For the first time in years, the sound was not suspicion but awe. What had once been a mark of shame was now the seed of change. The money would build walls, raise beams, carve windows into stone. The watch that had measured cruelty would fund a place for children to learn, to dream, to belong. The decision came swiftly, not forced, not begged. The people gathered by the chief's staff, and with one voice agreed. A school would rise. The air thickened with resolve, with a strange relief that no one could name. Some whispered it was a kind of justice. Others said it was mercy. Neo only listened, his chest aching with something he could not yet speak. Weeks passed. The ground was broken. The smell of sawdust and clay filled the air. Hammers struck. Children ran errands carrying nails and planks. Women brought water in gourds. Men hoisted beams skyward. The sound of work filled the square, sharper than drums, steadier than songs. Neo often slipped away from his parents' side to stand among the workers, staring at the rising shape. He watched the roof take form, the walls grow, the windows open toward the sun. His chest swelled with a feeling he had never known, as if the village itself was rebuilding not only a house, but its soul. On the day of the dedication, the square was dressed in color. Cloths hung from posts, drums lined the path, smoke from roasted meat curled upward. Children gathered with bright eyes, clutching the hands of their parents. In the center stood the building, simple, strong, its walls whitewashed, its beams polished by hand. Above the door, a sign had been carved with careful strokes. Neo School. Neo stood before it, his throat tight. His name did not feel like pride. It felt like a question carved in wood, visible to all. Yet when he looked up, he saw Zalika's eyes wet with tears, Kwame's shoulders proud though weary. The people clapped, the drums pounded, and the air vibrated with joy. Inside the hall, on the far wall, a wicker basket hung. Old, stained, bent from years of wear. The basket that once rocked in dark waters now hung as a symbol, not of loss, but of salvation. Beneath it, on a small wooden plaque, the words had been carved. From here, a life was chosen again. Neo stepped closer, his chest tightening. The sight of it pulled at something deep, both wound and balm. He reached out but stopped his hand short of touching. His reflection shimmered in the smooth curve of the wicker. He saw a boy once abandoned, and a boy still standing. It was then that Zalika noticed the folded paper tucked beneath the rim of the basket. She pulled it free carefully. The paper was rough, the handwriting hurried, uneven. She opened it, her lips moving as her eyes scanned. The hall hushed. The letter was short, unsigned, but its weight pressed heavy in every word. Forgive what cannot be undone. Let this place heal what I broke. May no child ever again be left to the river." The villagers exchanged looks, whispers rising, but no one questioned whose hand had written it. Zalika's fingers trembled, and she pressed the letter against her chest. Kwame's face hardened, but his eyes softened when they fell on Neo. The boy's heart pounded. For the first time, the sound of ticking was gone. In its place, he heard only the murmur of voices, the laughter of children rushing into the new rooms, the scrape of chalk against fresh slates. That night, Neo slipped away from the celebration and walked to the river. The moon hung low, the water whispering. He sat beneath the fig tree, the roots cold against his back. In his hand he held the bracelet of beads. They had marked him since the day he was named, a sign of belonging, of promise. He turned them slowly, each bead clicking against the next. He bent forward, his lips near the water. He whispered, "Not to the river, not to the night, but to the past. I was chosen, and I choose again." His fingers loosened. The bracelet fell, the beads scattering as they hit the water. They bobbed, caught in the current, then slipped under. The ripples spread wide, carrying the gesture into the dark. Neo sat still, tears pricking his eyes, but his chest lighter than before. Behind him, footsteps approached. Kwame and Zalika stood quietly, not speaking, only placing their hands on his shoulders. Their warmth anchored him. Together they watched the water swallow the beads, and for once, the night did not echo with ticking. Instead, laughter from the schoolyard carried faintly through the trees. The moon's reflection wavered on the water, not sharp and cold, but soft, warm, as though time itself had been gentled. The basket hung safe in the hall. The watch was gone, the letter folded against a mother's chest. And Neo, sitting between the two who had chosen him, let himself breathe in the sound of children's voices, carried on the wind, bright as dawn. He did not know what the future held, but he knew the past no longer owned him. The river would always whisper, but tonight it whispered of release. The night stretched wide, the stars steady above. The boy who had once clutched a torn strip of leather now let go of beads into the current. The school stood tall behind him, filled with voices. The world did not erase what had been broken, but it had built something new. Neo closed his eyes, hearing only the water and the laughter, the two sounds weaving into one, and the moon watched, patient, over a child who was no longer only a child of the river, but a child of hope, carrying forward what others had almost lost. There are stories that do not fade when the final word is spoken. They remain, like the echo of footsteps after the road is empty, or the hush of the river after the boat has passed. At their heart, they remind us of truths too deep to be captured in simple phrases. That life is fragile, yet resilient. That what is cast away can still find its place. That even in the darkest betrayals, light may carve a path forward. What lingers most is not the noise of conflict, nor the weight of loss, but the quiet choices made when no one else is watching. The choice to extend a hand rather than turn away. The choice to nurture what others would discard. The choice to carry the weight of love even when it comes at great cost. These are not grand gestures of heroes in tales, but the very breath of humanity itself. Every generation inherits brokenness, scars passed down through time, burdens left unspoken. Yet every generation also holds the chance to mend, to rebuild, to transform hurt into something that breathes hope. The past does not vanish. It becomes the foundation upon which compassion can be laid, brick by brick. Forgiveness may not erase wounds, but it can plant seeds where bitterness once thrived. Justice may not always roar like thunder, but sometimes it whispers through the steady work of building a future where fewer are left behind. We live in a world where it is easy to discard what seems inconvenient, to measure worth by surface or status, to believe that destiny is dictated by blood or fortune. But stories like this ask us to see differently. They teach that belonging can be chosen, that dignity can be restored, that love can defy even the weight of time. They ask us to remember that no life is ever too small, no beginning too broken, no loss too deep to prevent renewal. Perhaps the greatest lesson is that human worth is not found in gold, nor in the titles etched on paper, but in the quiet endurance of those who keep choosing to protect, to heal, to stand beside one another. In that endurance lies a kind of timeless defiance against despair. In that endurance lies the possibility of a world gentler than the one we inherited. And so, when the echoes of this story fade and silence takes its place, may it not be an ending, but an opening, an invitation to look closer at the lives around us, to listen for the quiet cries that risk being swallowed by the noise, and to become the ones who refuse to let them be lost. Thank you for journeying through this tale. If it touched something in you, if it stirred memory, or raised questions, or lit even a small spark of recognition, I invite you to share your thoughts below. Your reflections matter, and your voice may become part of the healing this world so deeply needs. Don't forget to follow and subscribe, so together we can keep telling stories that carry the weight of truth, the warmth of compassion, and the enduring promise that light always finds its way through.